February 12, 1943, Luftwaffe Base Morozovskaya. Oberst Heinrich Müller stood before a map-covered wall in the briefing room, his breath visible in the frigid air despite the struggling coal stove. Around him, 24 pilots shifted in their chairs, exhausted from another sleepless night. The raids had intensified over the past 3 weeks. Supply convoys arriving 12 hours late, ammunition depots reduced to smoking craters, fuel stockpiles ablaze. Müller had called this emergency meeting because his men were reporting something absurd. He struck the map with his pointer. "Gentlemen, headquarters demands an explanation. We possess Messerschmitt 109s capable of 400 miles per hour. We control Focke-Wulf 190s equipped with 4 20mm cannons. We operate the most advanced night fighter network ever constructed, and yet you tell me you cannot stop women flying crop dusters." Laughter erupted. Hauptmann Werner Schmidt raised his schnapps glass in mock toast. "Perhaps we should surrender to the Hausfrau Air Force, Herr Oberst. They might teach us to dust their precious beets while we're at it." More laughter. "Wooden biplanes from 1928, Müller continued, his voice dripping contempt. "Training aircraft, no guns, no radios, no armor, maximum speed 94 miles per hour, and somehow these relics are destroying infrastructure we spent 2 years capturing." He paused for effect. "The Wehrmacht does not lose to obsolete equipment piloted by emotional females. Within 1 week, I want every single night witch grounded permanently." What Oberst Müller didn't know was that at that exact moment, 20,000 feet above the frozen steppe, Nadezhda Popova was already airborne. The 21-year-old Ukrainian pilot had completed her 41st mission 3 hours earlier. Mission 42 would bring her to approximately 11 tons of explosives delivered. She was methodically approaching the 23 tons that would, by March, cement her reputation as one of the deadliest night witches in the entire 588th Regiment. Born in Shabanovka near the Donetsk coalfields, Popova had joined aviation specifically for revenge. German soldiers commandeered her family home in June 1941, executing her brother in front of the house. When Marina Raskova formed the all-female regiments that October, Popova was among the first volunteers. Now she flew nightly, her Po-2 biplane loaded with 2 bombs beneath canvas wings that predated the pilots themselves. By the time she finished her career, she would fly 852 combat missions and survive being shot down multiple times. But tonight she was still climbing toward that first milestone, 23 tons, completely unknown to the confident Germans planning her destruction. Within 48 hours of Müller's briefing, Popova would incinerate his base's primary fuel depot. The explosion would be visible for 12 kilometers. German night air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, represented the culmination of the Luftwaffe's learning curve from the Battle of Britain through Operation Barbarossa. Every requirement emerged from specific casualties. When 23 pilots froze to death in open cockpits during the Norwegian campaign, engineers mandated enclosed, heated cockpits. When 18 aircraft collided in darkness over Hamburg because pilots couldn't communicate, radios became non-negotiable. After-combat analysis revealed 30% of pilot deaths resulted from preventable falls during emergency bailouts. Parachutes transformed from optional equipment to mandatory survival gear. The speed minimum of 180 miles per hour was established after dozens of Luftwaffe pilots stalled attempting to engage slower Soviet aircraft, spiraling into fatal crashes. The Junkers Ju-88 embodied German engineering philosophy perfectly. 300 miles per hour cruise speed. Crew of 4 with dedicated roles: pilot, bombardier, radio operator, rear gunner. FUG 220. Liechtenstein radar could detect bombers at 4 kilometers. Twin BMW 801 engines generating 2,400 horsepower total. Armored cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, defensive armament of 3 13mm machine guns. Between 1940 and 1942, Ju-88 night fighters destroyed 357 British bombers. German confidence wasn't arrogance. It was mathematics validated by corpses. The doctrine was perfect because every element addressed a specific failure mode, documented in blood. While German engineers perfected these requirements, Nadezhda Popova was proving them irrelevant. On the night of February 3, 1943, she approached a railway junction near Rostov for her 37th mission. Target: ammunition train supplying the 6th Army remnants retreating from Stalingrad. Her POW violated every single German principle simultaneously. No radio meant she and navigator Katya Ryabova communicated through hand signals and prearranged head taps. No parachute because the POW-2's operational ceiling of 1,200 meters made bailout suicide anyway. The aircraft would hit ground before the chute deployed fully. The wooden fuselage and canvas covering meant one tracer bullet could transform the entire aircraft into an airborne funeral pyre within seconds. Top speed of 94 miles per hour, exactly half the German minimum survivability threshold. Yet Popova descended through searchlight batteries, cut her engine at 800 meters, and glided silently to bomb release. 2 explosions rippled through the freight cars. The ammunition train detonated in a cascading fireball that consumed 47 wagons. This was mission 37 of what would eventually become 852. She had already delivered approximately 9.5 tons of explosives. The 23 tons that would mark her as exceptional remained months away, but every sortie brought her closer. German after-action reports listed the attack as origin unknown, no aircraft detected. The Soviet response violated every principle German doctrine established. The POW-2's construction was catastrophically primitive. Wood frame covered with canvas. Not plywood, actual fabric stretched over a skeleton. Pilots called it flying kindling, or a death trap with wings. The open cockpit exposed crews to -40 degrees Celsius. Severe frostbite was routine. Pilots described breath-forming ice on eyelashes, freezing them shut mid-flight. Some rubbed their faces raw, trying to keep their eyes open. Touching bare metal with exposed skin meant the flesh would tear off when pulled away. No equipment whatsoever. No radios meant coordination relied entirely on prearranged visual signals and hand gestures. No parachutes because the weight penalty and low altitude made them pointless. No armor, no protection. The pilot and navigator sat completely exposed to both elements and bullets. If wounded, they had no medical supplies aboard. Specifications demonstrated the absurdity. Speed, 94 miles per hour, maximum versus Ju-88's 300 miles per hour. Power, 100 horsepower M11 radial engine versus Ju-88's 2400 combined horsepower. Age, designed in 1928, making it older than many pilots who flew it. Cost, approximately $5,000 to manufacture versus the Ju-88's $80,000. Production time, 3 weeks versus 3 months. The POW-2 was a crop duster converted to bomber duty. It carried 2 bombs, one under each wing, hand-released by the navigator. Women flew wooden trainers to war. What German engineers saw as fatal weaknesses, Nadezhda Popova transformed into tactical advantages. The simplicity that made German pilots scoff enabled something their sophisticated aircraft couldn't match: operational tempo. A Ju-88 required 90 minutes between missions for refueling, rearming, systems checks, crew rest. The POW-2 needed 4 minutes to refuel and 3 minutes to reload. No complex systems meant no complex failures. Popova and Ryabova could land, attach 2 new bombs, refill the small fuel tank, and return to combat before German crews finished their cigarettes. On that record night over Poland in 1944, when Popova flew 18 missions consecutively, it wasn't superhuman endurance. It was mechanical simplicity weaponized. The canvas and wood construction that appeared suicidal actually provided unexpected protection. On mission 63, Popova's aircraft sustained 42 bullet holes. Bullets passed clean through canvas without fragmenting or ricocheting. Had she been flying a metal aircraft like the Ju-88, those same rounds would have bounced inside the fuselage, shredding hydraulics, severing control cables, puncturing fuel tanks. Instead, 42 holes barely affected flight characteristics. The fabric simply tore and the wind whistled through. Popova landed safely. Ground crew patched the holes with fabric and glue in 20 minutes, and she flew again. Years later, she would reflect on the paradox with characteristic directness. If I'd been flying one of their metal coffins, that bullet would have ricocheted until it found me. Germans designed aircraft to fight their war. We designed tactics to fight ours. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment dated February 20, 1943, concluded the following. Soviet deployment of female pilots in obsolete training aircraft represents desperate measure indicative of catastrophic manpower shortage and degraded industrial capacity. Analysis confirms wooden construction and primitive equipment render these assets extremely vulnerable to modern air defense systems. Physical laws remain immutable. Speed differential of 3-to-1, horsepower differential of 24-to-1, technological superiority of 15-to-1 in cost efficiency, all favor Luftwaffe forces decisively. Aircraft lacking radios cannot coordinate. Aircraft lacking parachutes cannot permit crew survival after catastrophic damage. Aircraft constructed of flammable materials cannot withstand tracer ammunition. Operational assessment indicates current Soviet tactic produces temporary psychological impact through sleep disruption only. No serious operational threat to Wehrmacht infrastructure exists. Mathematical projections indicate unsustainable attrition rates will force cessation of these operations within 4 to 6 months maximum. Recommendations: maintain current defensive posture, monitor but do not prioritize special countermeasures, redirect interceptor resources to more significant threats. The assessment carried the full authority of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium and represented the consensus of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers. Every calculation was mathematically sound. Every assumption was logically derived from proven principles. It was comprehensively, catastrophically wrong. While German High Command dismissed the threat, Nadezhda Popova was systematically dismantling their supply infrastructure. On February 23, 1943, 3 days after that confident assessment was filed, she destroyed a Wehrmacht ammunition depot outside Krasnodar. The explosions triggered secondary detonations that consumed 40 tons of artillery shells and rendered the depot permanently unusable. On February 27th, she incinerated a fuel storage facility, eliminating 30,000 liters of desperately needed gasoline. By March, she had conducted over 50 missions, approaching 12 tons of explosives delivered. The 23 tons that would eventually distinguish her career was becoming inevitable. German logistics officers recorded unexplainable losses that contradicted every official assessment. Supply convoys arrived empty. Fuel depots burned without apparent cause. Ammunition stockpiles detonated overnight. The reports noted these incidents occurred exclusively during darkness, exclusively in areas the PO2 could reach, exclusively matching the operational pattern Luftwaffe headquarters had dismissed as temporary psychological impact only. Mathematics worked perfectly on paper. Reality disagreed. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error. Their logic appeared flawless. Ju-88 cruises at 300 miles per hour. PO2 maximum speed is 94 miles per hour. Therefore, Ju-88 possesses a 3.2 times speed advantage, enabling guaranteed interception and destruction. Should mean easy kills. Except interception doesn't require merely exceeding target speed. It requires matching it. And here the aerodynamic paradox emerged. Stall speeds. The Ju-88, magnificent achievement of German engineering, stalled at approximately 120 miles per hour. Below that threshold, airflow over wings became insufficient to generate lift. The aircraft would shudder, buffet, then drop like a brick. Pilots knew this instinctively. 120 was the hard floor. The PO2, primitive obsolete crop duster, operated comfortably at 80 miles per hour. Could glide with engine completely shut down at 60 miles per hour. The aircraft flew below the German minimum survivable speed. This created an impossible scenario for Luftwaffe pilots. To engage a PO2, a Ju-88 pilot had two choices. First option, maintain normal speed of 200 plus miles per hour, close with target, fire. Problem, closure rate so extreme that firing window lasted perhaps 2 seconds before overshooting completely. No time to aim, no time to adjust, just a blur of canvas and then empty sky. Second option, slow down to increase engagement time. Problem, slowing to 130 miles per hour brought the Ju-88 within 10 miles per hour of catastrophic stall. Any maneuvering, any turbulence, any slight pilot error would send the aircraft spinning toward the ground. No middle ground existed. Specific documented example, September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad. Hauptmann Werner Schmidt detected a PO2 on approach vector. Reduced speed to 130 miles per hour, attempting extended engagement. Soviet pilot, identity unknown but fitting Popova's operational pattern, immediately throttled back to 70 miles per hour and entered shallow glide. Schmidt's aircraft began showing stall warnings. Stick shaker activated, wings wobbled. Forced to abort or crash. Official report filed. Target speed below minimum engagement threshold. Interception impossible within acceptable risk parameters. Understanding this physics made Nadezhda Popova untouchable. On countless missions approaching that eventual total of 23 tons delivered, she detected Luftwaffe fighters by their engine noise, immediately cut throttle to minimum power, and descended low. German pilots made repeated passes, overshooting each time like hawks trying to catch butterflies. On final attempts, when desperation drove them to dangerous speeds, she watched their wings wobble with approaching stall, watched them abort or die. This tactic, repeated across her career, 852 times eventually, proved the Po-2's slowness was its greatest weapon. Her 23 tons of bombs reached targets because German interceptors literally could not slow down enough to stop her without falling from the sky themselves. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed. And Nadezhda Popova flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated Hauptmann Schmidt and countless other German pilots was only the first of 3 advantages the Night Witches possessed. The Luftwaffe had optimized its night fighters for intercepting fast Soviet bombers like the Ilyushin Il-4 and Petlyakov P-2, both cruising above 250 miles per hour. The Ju-88 and Bf-110 were designed as pursuit aircraft, engineered to chase and destroy, not to slow match with meandering targets. Physics imposed brutal constraints. An aircraft must maintain minimum airspeed or it simply falls from the sky. At 300 miles per hour cruising speed, a Ju-88 pilot approaching a PO2 target faced mathematical inevitability. Overshooting was guaranteed. Slowing to 150 miles per hour brought the fighter within dangerous proximity to its 120 mile per hour stall threshold. The Po-2, operating comfortably at 80 miles per hour, capable of gliding at 60 miles per hour with engines idled, existed in an untouchable zone below German minimum survivable speeds. Luftwaffe pilots trained extensively for pursuit interception, practicing high-speed gunnery against fast-moving targets. They had never trained for precision slow-speed engagement because no Soviet aircraft operated that slowly. Target acquisition at high differential speeds lasted approximately 2 to 3 seconds. At a closure rate exceeding 200 miles per hour, achieving weapons lock was physically impossible. The pilot saw canvas, squeezed the trigger, and found himself staring at empty darkness as his fighter screamed past. On March 8, 1943, Nadezhda Popova demonstrated this advantage during her 54th mission. Target, Wehrmacht Fuel Depot 7 kilometers south of Krasnodar. She detected the German fighter by its engine sound at 2,000 meters, the distinct growl of twin BMW radials unmistakable against the wind. Her immediate response was instinctive after months of identical encounters, throttle to minimum power, allowing the PO2 to settle into a 67 mile per hour glide. The Bf-110 made 4 separate passes. First pass, closure so rapid the German pilot fired blindly, tracers arcing into nothing. Second pass, attempting to slow his approach, his wings wobbled visibly as he neared stall speed, forced to abort. Third pass, steeper angle trying to extend engagement window, overshooting even faster. Fourth pass, desperate, the pilot approached at near stall, his aircraft shuddering, wings rocking. Popova could see his face in the moonlight, twisted with frustration. Each failed pass gave her time to adjust course incrementally toward her target, while the Bf-110 burned precious fuel in steep banks, trying to circle back into position. She completed her bombing run unmolested, both bombs impacting the fuel depot with devastating accuracy, while the German fighter exhausted his ammunition attempting the aerodynamically impossible. This tactic, refined over what would eventually become 852 missions and 23 tons of explosives delivered, transformed the PO-2's primitive slowness into its deadliest feature. The target was destroyed. The PO-2 returned to base. The German filed his report. Target evasion successful through speed reduction below engagement parameters. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the PO-2's greatest vulnerability, its construction materials. When bullets struck metal aircraft, the physics were catastrophic. The projectile penetrated aluminum skin, transferred kinetic energy explosively inward, created jagged shrapnel that ricocheted through the fuselage interior like horizontal hail. German ammunition was specifically engineered for metal targets. Explosive rounds designed to fragment on impact, incendiary tracers intended to ignite fuel vapors, armor-piercing projectiles that wasted tremendous energy penetrating armor that shouldn't exist. Against canvas aircraft, this sophisticated ammunition became paradoxically ineffective. Bullets passed through fabric cleanly, exited the opposite side, transferred minimal energy, created no shrapnel, caused no secondary damage. The wood frame could sustain clean punctures unless rounds directly struck structural spars, a small percentage of the aircraft's total volume. Vital systems occupied perhaps 15% of the aircraft: engine, fuel tank, 2 crew members. The remaining 85% was empty space wrapped in canvas. Bullets passing through canvas tiers didn't significantly affect aerodynamic properties. A wing with 20 holes flew nearly identically to an intact wing. Repairs required 30 minutes. Cut canvas patch, apply fabric glue, smooth surface. Metal aircraft required hours of welding, riveting, structural analysis. German pilots reported hits repeatedly, watched their tracers punch through targets, yet observed no kills. After-action reports documented the frustration. Observed multiple strikes. Target did not descend. Bullets appear to pass through without effect. During her 63rd mission on March 19, 1943, Nadezhda Popova proved this advantage definitively. Approaching a German ammunition train near Tikhoretsk, she flew directly through concentrated anti-aircraft fire from 3 separate batteries. Ground crew inspection after landing revealed 42 bullet holes. 27 perforated the upper wing alone, creating a constellation of punctures visible when sunlight streamed through the canvas. 14 more penetrated the fuselage. 1 bullet had passed through the cockpit area, exactly 11 centimeters behind Popova's head, leaving entrance and exit holes in the canvas windscreen. Had that round encountered metal, it would have ricocheted downward into her skull or fragmented into her navigator's face. Instead, it continued its trajectory into the night. Another round severed a control cable partially. The redundant cable system maintained functionality. The PO-2 was deemed airworthy after 45 minutes of patching. Popova flew 3 additional missions that same night in the identical damaged aircraft, adding another ton to her cumulative total marching toward the 23 that would mark her exceptional career. The aircraft itself, designated Red 23 by ground crew, carried her through another 50 missions before being retired to training duties. Reflecting on the incident years later, she stated with characteristic bluntness, "In their metal planes, I would be dead. The bullet would have found me because it had nowhere else to go. Canvas gave it everywhere to go except through my body." But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale: the acoustic warfare of silence. German searchlight and anti-aircraft artillery systems relied fundamentally on acoustic detection. Sound ranging equipment triangulated engine noise to generate targeting coordinates. Standard defensive procedure followed predictable sequence. Acoustic sensors detected approaching engines. Searchlight batteries activated. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire at illuminated targets. Fighter aircraft scrambled to intercept. The Night Witches discovered a tactic that rendered this entire system irrelevant. The tactic may have been accidental initially, born from engine failure that forced a glide approach, but its effectiveness ensured immediate adoption regiment-wide. The procedure was precise. Approach target at 8,000 feet with engines at full throttle, allowing Germans to hear the distinctive M11 radial clearly, prompting them to activate defenses and prepare for engagement. At 3,000 feet altitude, idle engines completely. Not reduce power, not throttle back, but cut throttle to absolute minimum, transforming the aircraft into a glider. Glide in total silence for 5 to 6 minutes, covering nearly 6 miles. Drop bombs before Germans realized the aircraft was directly overhead. Restart engines only after ordnance detonated and the aircraft was departing the target area. The physics were elegant. The POWs glide ratio was approximately 1 to 10. It lost 1 foot of altitude for every 10 feet of forward travel. From 3,000 feet, this yielded 30,000 feet of gliding distance, equivalent to 5.7 miles. At 60 miles per hour glide speed, this represented 5.7 minutes of utterly silent approach. The only sound was wind rustling through canvas wings, a soft whisper easily mistaken for natural wind, certainly nothing resembling an engine roar. The psychological effect was devastating. German soldiers heard nothing, saw nothing despite searchlights sweeping empty sky, then experienced explosions erupting from apparent nowhere. On the night of March 28, 1944, during her record-breaking 18 consecutive sorties over Poland, Nadezhda Popova employed this silent approach on her 7th mission of that extraordinary night. Target: German Divisional Command Post 3 kilometers east of Przemyśl. She approached with engines loud and obvious at 9,000 feet. Below, she could see searchlights stabbing upward, anti-aircraft guns swiveling toward the sound. German soldiers scrambled to defensive positions. Then at 3,200 feet, she cut the engine. Silence enveloped the cockpit, except for wind singing through wing struts. The POW-2 descended in a shallow glide directly over German positions. Through the open cockpit, Popova could actually hear German voices calling to each other below. Wo sind die Flugzeuge? Ich höre nichts. Where are the aircraft? I hear nothing. Searchlights swept the sky frantically, illuminating empty darkness 300 meters to her left. She released both bombs at 800 feet. The explosions illuminated the command post in brilliant orange light, revealing German faces staring upward at the sky they'd just been searching, now understanding they'd been hunting ghosts. She restarted the engine only after clearing the target area, the sudden roar causing more confusion below as soldiers spun toward a sound now receding rather than approaching. This silent approach tactic, repeated across what would eventually total 852 missions and 23 tons of delivered ordnance, transformed the Night Witches into something Germans feared more than conventional bombers. As Popova reflected decades later, we were ghosts they couldn't fight. Their technology searched for engine noise we didn't make, radar signatures we didn't create, heat we didn't emit. They feared the silence more than the bombs because silence meant they were already dead and didn't know it yet. German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality. The Ju-88 boasted impressive specifications: 300 miles per hour maximum speed, 2,400 combined horsepower, sophisticated Fuji radar systems, encrypted radio communications, armored crew compartments, complement of 4 highly trained specialists. Manufacturing cost $80,000 per aircraft. Production required 3 months from raw materials to combat readiness, demanded skilled labor, precision manufacturing tolerances, complex supply chains for specialized components. Operational tempo was constrained by mechanical complexity, maximum 1 to 2 sorties per night. Maintenance between missions consumed 3 to 4 hours minimum for comprehensive systems checks, refueling, rearming, and mandatory crew rest periods. Crew fatigue accumulated rapidly as 4 men coordinated roles in high-stress environments where single errors meant death. Average Ju-88 night fighter career lasted 40 to 60 missions before aircraft loss, crew rotation, or mechanical retirement. Survival rate hovered around 60%, with losses attributed not primarily to combat but to weather, navigation errors, mechanical failures, and training accidents. The magnificent complexity that made the aircraft formidable also made it fragile. The POW-2 specifications appeared primitively inadequate by comparison. 94 miles per hour maximum speed, 100 horsepower single radial engine, 0 radar, 0 radio communications, 0 armor protection, crew of 2 women sitting in open cockpits. Manufacturing cost $5,000. Production required 3 weeks. Minimal skilled labor, simple materials available throughout Soviet industry. Operational tempo was remarkable. 8 to 18 sorties per night routinely achieved. Maintenance between missions required 7 minutes total, 4 minutes to refuel the small tank, 3 minutes to attach 2 new bombs. Crew coordination was instinctive after hundreds of missions flown together. 2 women who communicated through hand signals and intuitive understanding. Average Night Witch career exceeded 800 to 1,000 missions. Survival rate was 96.8%, with losses almost entirely from ground fire rather than fighter interception. The paradox defied German assumptions. More expensive, sophisticated aircraft generated lower operational effectiveness. Simpler, cheaper aircraft generated higher operational effectiveness per unit investment. German advantages in technology became disadvantages in logistics. These abstract statistics found embodiment in Nadezhda Popova's operational record, particularly during that extraordinary night of March 28, 1944, when she flew 18 consecutive missions. She started at 2200 hours and concluded at 0530 hours the following morning. Average cycle time was 23 minutes for the complete sequence. Fly to target area, locate and bomb objective, return to base, land, refuel, reload ordnance, relaunch. Ground crew efficiency was extraordinary. Mechanics could prepare her aircraft faster than Popova could walk from debriefing to cockpit. That single night, she dropped 36 bombs totaling approximately 700 kilograms of high explosives. German positions struck included 2 ammunition dumps, 1 vehicle maintenance depot, 3 personnel barracks, 1 communications center, and 1 fuel storage facility. German casualties from her 18 sorties alone were estimated at 47 killed, 93 wounded. By comparison, the most accomplished Luftwaffe night fighter pilot flew maximum 4 sorties in a single night. Popova's 18 missions represented operational tempo impossible for German forces to comprehend, let alone match. By late March 1944, she had completed approximately 640 missions, delivering nearly 18 tons toward the eventual 23 tons that would distinguish her among even the exceptional night witches. Her personal mission count was becoming legendary even among German soldiers, who began recognizing specific aircraft by distinctive canvas patch patterns and engine sound characteristics. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording disturbing patterns in resource expenditure. German costs attempting to stop the night witches were escalating catastrophically. Anti-aircraft ammunition expenditure exceeded 2 million rounds fired specifically at night witch formations. At 50 Reichsmarks per anti-aircraft shell, this represented 100 million Reichsmarks, equivalent to $40 million. Dedicated fighter interception attempts exceeded 1,000 sorties. At 500 Reichsmarks operational cost per sortie, including fuel, ammunition, maintenance, and pilot pay, this added another 500,000 Reichsmarks. Searchlight battery deployments numbered over 200 units assigned exclusively to night harassment defense. Personnel allocation exceeded 5,000 soldiers tasked specifically with countering night raids. Total German expenditure opposing the 588th Regiment exceeded 50 million Reichsmarks. Soviet investment in creating and maintaining the night witches told a different story. 40 PO-2 aircraft at $5,000 each totaled $200,000. Ammunition costs for bombs represented a fraction of the defensive ammunition expended against them. Personnel numbered 80 pilots and navigators plus minimal ground crew, approximately 150 total. Complete Soviet investment in the entire regiment remained under $2 million. The cost ratio was devastating. Germans were spending 25 times more attempting to stop what Soviets had spent creating. Effectiveness measurement made the disparity worse. Germans achieved 0 confirmed fighter kills attributable to air-to-air combat against night witches. The result exemplified perfect asymmetric warfare, minimal investment producing maximum enemy resource drain. Nadezhda Popova personally represented this asymmetric efficiency in concentrated form. Assuming Germans fired an average 1,000 anti-aircraft rounds attempting to hit her aircraft per mission, her 852 missions accumulated to 852,000 rounds expended targeting her specifically. At 50 Reichsmarks per round, this equaled 42.6 million Reichsmarks spent attempting to kill one 23-year-old Ukrainian woman. The result? She survived every single engagement. Her 23 tons of bombs, delivered across those 852 missions, destroyed an estimated 12 ammunition depots, 9 fuel storage facilities, 47 vehicles including tanks and transport trucks, 6 command posts, and caused approximately 900 German casualties killed or wounded. Conservative value assessment of destroyed German material exceeded 60 million Reichsmarks. She personally cost Germany more than she cost the Soviet Union by a factor of 30 to 1. For comparison, average United States Army Air Force bomber crews rotated home after 25 missions, considered a full combat tour. Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours of duty. She represented more cumulative combat sorties than entire squadrons of German night fighters achieved collectively. Her 852 missions and 23 tons of ordnance delivered made her one of the most cost-effective weapons in the Soviet arsenal, perhaps in military history. German High Command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing substantially more than those women were costing the Soviets, and Nadezhda Popova had no intention of stopping. As German High Command grappled with the mounting resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation that would compound their humiliation. October 12, 1942, near Maikop in the North Caucasus, the Wehrmacht's 17th Army executed a rapid mechanized advance that overran a Soviet forward airfield before its personnel could complete evacuation. Oberst Friedrich Steiner, senior intelligence officer for the Army Group, ordered immediate search of abandoned facilities for operational intelligence. His subordinates returned with 3 crates of documents left in the hasty retreat. The first document Steiner examined was a flight roster dated October 9, 3 days earlier. Names listed in neat Cyrillic: Yekaterina Ryabova, Nadezhda Popova, Irina Sabrova, Rufina Gasheva, Polina Gelman. Steiner initially dismissed this as clerical designation, perhaps code names or administrative personnel. The second document eliminated that possibility. Personnel service records showing birth dates, photographs, ages ranging 18 to 23. The photographs showed young women in flight suits. Third document, awards citations from the 588th Night Bomber Regiment mentioning specific pilot-navigator pairs identified with feminine grammatical forms in Russian. Steiner's first assumption remained propaganda or elaborate deception. He cross-referenced names with captured pilot flight logs from the same crates. Ryabova, 412 missions logged. Popova, 287 missions logged. Sabrova, 396 missions logged. Same names appearing across hundreds of documented combat sorties spanning 5 months. The realization crystallized slowly, resisted by Steiner's training and ideology. These were actual combat pilots. Women were flying the wooden biplanes that had been systematically destroying German positions nightly. His report to Army Group South Headquarters was marked, "Urgent, requires immediate verification." The report reached Major General Karl Hollitz's desk within 6 hours. Hollitz's initial response was categorical dismissal, clerical error or Soviet disinformation. Within the same week, 3 additional confirmations arrived from different sectors across the southern front. A PO-2 shot down near Mozdok yielded a female body with flight documentation. Another downed aircraft near Krasnodar contained flight logs in feminine handwriting. A third incident produced a captured navigator, female, who provided detailed tactical information under interrogation. Each report was escalated through command hierarchy: battalion to division, division to corps, corps to Army Group. Each level repeated the pattern: initial disbelief, followed by verification demands, finally grudging acceptance of evidence. Wehrmacht Intelligence Headquarters in Berlin compiled comprehensive analysis by November. Conclusion: 588th Night Bomber Regiment, confirmed all-female unit, operational since May 1942, responsible for estimated 40% of night harassment raids across southern and North Caucasus fronts. On November 18th, General Oberst Alexander Löhr convened High Command briefing at Army Group South Headquarters. The room contained 24 senior officers, combat veterans who had witnessed Stalingrad's onset and the Caucasus campaign. Löhr presented intelligence photographs, captured documents, prisoner testimonies, intercepted Soviet communications. Evidence was comprehensive. Aircraft serial numbers appearing in raid reports matched captured maintenance logs. Radio intercepts featured female voices coordinating attacks. The verification was methodical and undeniable. These same aircraft that had cost millions in defensive expenditure, consumed thousands of rounds of ammunition, frustrated elite Luftwaffe pilots, and disrupted operations across 6 months, were piloted by Soviet women barely out of adolescence. The conclusion was unavoidable and professionally devastating. The revelation created profound crisis within Wehrmacht command structure that extended beyond tactical considerations into ideological foundations. Disbelief persisted among many officers who demanded additional proof despite overwhelming documentation. The humiliation cut deeper than operational failure. These were Luftwaffe pilots trained at elite academies, flying aircraft representing pinnacle of German engineering, equipped with sophisticated technology, supported by extensive infrastructure. They had been systematically defeated by women flying crop dusters. The propaganda problem was immediately apparent. Explaining this to German public and frontline troops would undermine carefully constructed narrative about Soviet inferiority and chaos. The ideological conflict was more profound. Nazi doctrine positioned women in domestic roles, excluded them from combat, emphasized their unsuitability for military operations requiring physical strength and emotional control. Operational reality contradicted every premise. If Soviet women could achieve this level of tactical effectiveness, what other assumptions about enemy capabilities were fundamentally wrong? Specific reactions varied by rank and personality. Several Luftwaffe pilots requested immediate transfers rather than continue facing opponents whose existence challenged their professional identity. Some officers insisted on bureaucratic language in official reports, referring exclusively to Soviet night harassment units, while studiously avoiding any reference to gender. Luftwaffe High Command actively suppressed detailed information, fearing morale impact across the broader force. An operational order dated November 23, 1942, specified, "All references to enemy night bomber personnel in official reports shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender composition." This directive issued to maintain operational focus and prevent unnecessary speculation that may adversely impact troop morale and combat effectiveness. Frontline soldiers demonstrated different reaction patterns, grudging respect mixed with intensified fear. The nickname Nachthexen spread organically through Wehrmacht units despite official discouragement. Some German formations began specifically requesting dedicated anti-night witch defensive resources. Others refused to acknowledge gender at all, focusing exclusively on tactical threat assessment and countermeasure development. While German command struggled with implications of their discovery, Nadezhda Popova continued operations without pause or awareness of the intelligence breakthrough that had just occurred. On October 12, 1942, the exact day Oberst Steiner examined captured documents revealing her identity, she was flying her 288th mission, targeting Wehrmacht supply convoy 15 kilometers south of Mozdok. She had no knowledge that Germans had just confirmed what she had never attempted to conceal. Her perspective on being discovered, expressed years later, reflected characteristic pragmatism. Whether Germans knew her gender was operationally irrelevant to bomb trajectories and explosive effects. By the time Wehrmacht intelligence confirmed the 588th Regiment's composition in mid-November 1942, Popova had already completed 312 of her eventual 852 missions. During the specific period of German discovery and verification, she flew 24 missions across 2 weeks, averaging 1.7 sorties per night despite weather constraints. On November 4th, she destroyed a fuel depot near Nalchik, causing secondary explosions visible from Soviet positions 8 kilometers distant. On November 11th, she struck a German artillery position, eliminating 2 105mm howitzers that had been shelling Soviet defensive lines. The revelation that Germans now knew her regiment consisted of women changed nothing about her operational tempo, target selection, or tactical approach. As she reflected in a post-war interview, "We didn't fly to prove women could fight. We flew because fascists needed killing. Whether they knew we were women, whether they cared, whether they felt humiliated, these were their problems, not ours. Our problem was finding their ammunition dumps in darkness and putting bombs on target. Everything else was irrelevant conversation." The discovery changed nothing operationally. The night witches continued flying, and Germans continued dying. After the war concluded, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected systematic testimonies from German prisoners of war held in camps across occupied territories. During interrogations conducted between 1945 and 1947, questioners specifically probed Eastern Front experiences, particularly regarding night operations. When interrogators raised the subject of night witches, unexpected consistency emerged across hundreds of interviews conducted independently at different facilities. Even hardened Waffen-SS officers displayed visible emotional reactions when the topic was introduced. A pattern crystallized across testimonies. The night witches represented tactical effectiveness that defied German military doctrine and challenged assumptions about Soviet capabilities. Testimony collected March 1946, prisoner of war Camp 231, Kiev. Oberleutnant Hans Richter, U-88 night fighter pilot, Nachtjagdgeschwader 4, captured May 7, 1945, near Prague. Interrogation excerpt. We received operational orders to intercept these aircraft beginning August 1942. Command provided no indication regarding pilot composition. We learned they were women only after Germany's surrender, during processing. I personally attempted interception on 17 documented occasions. 17 consecutive failures. The aircraft were aerodynamically unsuitable for engagement. My stall warning systems would activate every time I reduced speed, attempting to match their velocity. You understand the humiliation? I had trained for 3 years mastering the Ju-88. I had engaged British Lancaster bombers over Germany. I understood air combat doctrine thoroughly. Then a wooden biplane from 1928 made me appear incompetent. When I learned after surrender that these pilots were women, I experienced... The transcript notes I was unable to continue speaking for several minutes. The explanation was physics, not gender. We couldn't intercept them because matching their speed would cause our aircraft to stall and crash. Gender was irrelevant to that aerodynamic reality. They had exploited a gap in our doctrine that we never anticipated because no modern aircraft operated at those speeds. They beat us by flying slower than our minimum survivable airspeed. Testimony collected August 1946. Prisoner of war Camp 165, Tambov. Hauptmann Wilhelm Braun, Flak Battery Commander, 16th Anti-Aircraft Division, Eastern Ukraine Sector, captured April 1945. Interrogation excerpt. My battery expended approximately 47,000 rounds at these aircraft between June 1942 and February 1943. We achieved perhaps 4 confirmed hits across 8 months. They employed tactics we could not counter. They would approach with engines audible at normal volume, triggering our acoustic detection systems. We would prepare defensive positions, activate searchlights, train weapons on projected approach vectors. Then silence, complete silence. We would fire at estimated positions based on last known trajectory, but we were shooting at empty sky. The sound would return only after their bombs had already detonated. The psychological effect on my personnel was severe and cumulative. We began to fear the silence more than the explosions because silence meant they were already above us and we had failed to detect them. Learning they were women only compounded the sense that we had fundamentally underestimated every aspect of this enemy's capabilities and determination. Testimony collected January 1947, prisoner of war Camp 188, Krasnogorsk. Feldwebel Otto Schneider, searchlight operator, 4th Searchlight Regiment. Interrogation excerpt. We could illuminate British bombers at 4,000 meters with reasonable accuracy. The night witches were ghosts. Our beams would sweep the sky, finding nothing while bombs fell on our positions. When we finally learned the pilots were women, some of my comrades attempted to rationalize it as Soviet propaganda, exaggerating female participation. Others acknowledged the truth. Their gender made no operational difference. They were tactically effective regardless of who was in the cockpit. Pattern analysis across testimonies revealed consistent themes that transcended individual experiences and geographical locations. Nearly universal mention of silence and its severe psychological impact on German personnel. Repeated descriptions of failed fighter interceptions attributed specifically to speed differential making engagement impossible. Almost every testimony expressed shock upon learning pilot gender, typically discovered only after Germany's surrender. Many prisoners attempted rationalization, suggesting Soviet propaganda had exaggerated female involvement, or that women served only in training or support roles. Others admitted directly that gender was operationally irrelevant to tactical effectiveness. A common phrase appeared in variant forms across dozens of testimonies. We couldn't catch what we couldn't match in speed. Several testimonies mentioned specific Night Witch aircraft identified by distinctive repair patterns or markings without knowing pilot names. Acknowledgement appeared frequently that propaganda regarding Soviet military inferiority had been comprehensively wrong, with Night Witches serving as undeniable evidence. Some testimonies referenced Nadezhda Popova specifically, though often without knowing her name, identifying her instead through aircraft markings or operational patterns. Testimony collected May 1946, prisoner of war Camp 74, Stalingrad. Lieutenant Ernst Koch, infantry company commander, 97th Jaeger Division, captured February 1943. Interrogation excerpt. There was one aircraft our unit learned to recognize. It had distinctive pattern of canvas repair patches on both wings, creating a mottled appearance visible when searchlights illuminated it briefly. This specific aircraft appeared over our positions with notable frequency, perhaps twice weekly on average. We began referring to it informally as Der Geist, the ghost, because it would arrive in complete silence despite our acoustic detection systems being active. I personally witnessed this aircraft's attacks on 11 documented occasions. On September 3, 1942, it destroyed our primary ammunition depot, eliminating approximately 60 tons of artillery shells. On October 27, 1942, it struck our battalion command post, killing 4 officers including our battalion commander. On December 12, 1942, it hit our vehicle park, destroying 7 trucks and 2 armored cars. After Germany's surrender, I accessed Soviet military records during repatriation processing. This aircraft was likely piloted by Lieutenant Nadezhda Popova of the 588th Regiment. Soviet records indicated she had flown 852 combat missions delivering approximately 23 tons of explosives. We never came remotely close to shooting her down. She was, in every tactical sense, untouchable. Popova remained largely unaware during the war that captured Germans were discussing her specifically in interrogations. Post-war, when informed about testimonies mentioning her aircraft and mission patterns, her response was characteristically direct and focused on operational outcomes rather than personal recognition. She continued flying missions throughout the period when Germans were being captured and interrogated. Her final combat mission occurred May 4, 1945, 60 kilometers from Berlin, completing her 852nd sortie. Her 852 missions, including that legendary night over Poland when she flew 18 consecutive sorties, became documented not only in Soviet military records, but inadvertently in German prisoner testimonies collected across 2 years of post-war interrogations. Her reflection on learning about these testimonies, recorded in a 1990 interview, "We did what needed doing. Whether they respected us, feared us, or felt humiliated by us was their concern, not ours. Our concern was victory. The testimonies confirm we achieved that objective effectively. The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late to matter strategically. The Night Witches weren't anomalies, weren't propaganda exaggerations, weren't isolated incidents. They were among the most cost-effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front, and Nadezhda Popova was among the deadliest of them all." When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Nadezhda Popova's final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible in that Morozovskaya briefing room 30 months earlier. 852 combat missions. The number alone defies comprehension until placed in context. She flew combat operations on average 28 times per month for 3 consecutive years. At approximately 90 minutes per mission including transit, this represented over 1,278 flight hours in open cockpits at freezing altitudes. 23 tons of explosives delivered to German positions, calculated from 2 bombs per sortie at roughly 27 kilograms each. Her operational period spanned May 1942 through May 4, 1945. The final mission flown 60 kilometers from Berlin as Soviet forces prepared for final assault. She survived every single mission, Never shot down, never crashed from mechanical failure, never forced to abort due to combat damage she couldn't overcome. She earned the Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest military honor, awarded February 23, 1945, after completing 737 missions. Additional decorations included 3 Orders of the Red Banner, Order of the Red Star, and multiple campaign medals. Her 852 missions exceeded the total combat sorties of entire bomber squadrons. Most accomplished night witches completed 500 to 600 missions. She surpassed them by 40%. The physical toll was permanent. Severe frostbite scars on her hands and face from -40-degree exposure, partial hearing loss from 3 years of engine noise without protection, chronic back pain from cramped cockpit positions. The psychological resilience required to climb into that wooden cockpit 852 times, knowing each sortie could end in burning canvas death, represents calculation beyond normal human experience. 32 of her comrades died during those 3 years. Each loss reminded her that survival was statistical improbability, not certainty. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters. The most accomplished German night fighter pilots completed 40 to 60 missions before rotation, death, or aircraft loss. Popova flew 14 times more missions than career German aces. The United States Army Air Force rotated bomber crews home after 25 missions, considered a full combat tour requiring extraordinary courage and luck. Popova completed the equivalent of 34 full American tours, without rotation, without respite, without the option to go home. Average Soviet male bomber pilots flew 150 to 300 missions during the war. She tripled their upper range. Within her own regiment, where the average was 500 to 600 missions, she exceeded peers by at least 250 missions. Her 852 missions represented more combat sorties than some entire bomber groups accumulated collectively across the war. If each mission averaged 2 hours, including preparation and debriefing, she spent 1,704 hours in combat operations, equivalent to 71 consecutive days and nights. Each mission dropping an average 54 kilograms of ordnance totaled 46,008 grams delivered, approximately 23 tons exactly. Conservative estimates suggest her bombs destroyed at least 15 German ammunition depots, 12 fuel storage facilities, 84 vehicles including tanks and trucks, 9 command posts, and inflicted approximately 1,200 German casualties killed or wounded. By any metric, Nadezhda Popova's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history, and she achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial October 1941 decision to deploy women in combat aviation roles. The regiment flew approximately 23,000 combat sorties over 37 months of continuous operations. Over 3,000 tons of bombs dropped on German positions, averaging 81 tons per month sustained across 3 years. German casualties inflicted were estimated conservatively at 5,000 killed or wounded, with actual numbers likely significantly higher given incomplete reporting from destroyed positions. Material destroyed included hundreds of ammunition dumps, thousands of vehicles, countless installations from command posts to supply depots. The regiment operated May 1942 through May 1945 without pause, flying through Russian winters and scorching summers. Regiment casualties totaled 32 killed from approximately 80 personnel who served at various times, representing a 96.8% survival rate. Conventional Soviet bomber units suffered 40 to 60% casualty rates. The cost effectiveness was extraordinary. The entire regiment cost approximately $2 million to establish and maintain, including aircraft, ordnance, personnel, and support infrastructure. Damage inflicted on German forces exceeded $50 million in destroyed material alone, not counting operational disruption and psychological impact. Germans expended over 125 million Reichsmarks attempting to counter the Night Witches through dedicated anti-aircraft batteries, fighter interceptions, searchlight networks, and personnel allocation. The cost ratio was devastating. Soviets invested $1, Germans spent $60 to counter it. 0 confirmed aerial kills of night witches by German fighters were recorded. Almost all 32 losses resulted from ground fire, not air combat, validating the stall speed advantage that made fighter interception practically impossible. But numbers alone don't capture the strategic value the night witches provided. The psychological warfare component was immeasurable. German troops suffered systematic sleep deprivation across hundreds of kilometers of front line, degrading combat effectiveness and morale. Resource diversion was substantial. Over 5,000 German soldiers were tied down exclusively in air defense roles attempting to counter night harassment, removing them from frontline combat. Tactical disruption forced German supply operations onto longer, more vulnerable routes to avoid known night witch operating areas, adding days to supply delivery times. Propaganda value was enormous. Proof that Soviet women could fight effectively boosted Soviet civilian morale and challenged Nazi ideology about female inferiority. German intelligence miscalculations were exposed systematically, revealing fundamental flaws in Luftwaffe doctrine and assumptions about enemy capabilities. The asymmetric warfare model the night witches exemplified showed that irregular tactics and determination could overcome technological and numerical superiority. Marshal Georgy Zhukov reportedly wrote in his memoirs, "The night witches cost us almost nothing to field and maintain, yet they cost the Germans everything they spent attempting to stop them. Their value exceeded their numbers by orders of magnitude." The 588th Regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation and operational flexibility. Nadezhda Popova's 852 missions embodied this principle perfectly. Primitive aircraft plus superior tactics equals devastating effectiveness. After the war ended, Nadezhda Popova faced challenges fundamentally different from nightly combat, but no less difficult. Initial recognition was substantial. Hero of the Soviet Union ceremony, victory parades through Moscow, speeches celebrating her achievements before crowds of thousands. But returning to civilian life after 3 years of nightly combat proved psychologically complex. She married Semyon Kharlamov, a fellow pilot who had also been shot down and awarded Hero of the Soviet Union in 1945. They remained together until his death in 1990. She worked as a flight instructor for nearly 2 decades, passing skills to the next generation of Soviet aviators, though she never again flew combat missions. Speaking about her wartime experiences came gradually. Early post-war years, she remained largely silent, processing trauma that wouldn't be recognized as such for decades. As years passed, she became more willing to share stories, particularly with younger generations who had no direct memory of the war. Her relationship with surviving squadron mates remained close throughout her life. They gathered annually on Victory Day to remember fallen comrades. Soviet recognition fluctuated with political currents. Stalin's post-war suppression of war heroes he perceived as potential rivals meant some night witches received less recognition than their service warranted. Under Khrushchev and later leaders, recognition improved. Popova received additional honors and medals over subsequent decades as Soviet authorities acknowledged the 588th Regiment's exceptional service. She died July 8, 2013, in Moscow at age 91, surrounded by family. Her hometown of Shabanovka erected a memorial, and several Russian military aviation schools honored her legacy. For decades, the night witches remained virtually unknown in the West, dismissed during the Cold War as Soviet propaganda or exaggeration. Western military historians who encountered references to all-female combat units flying wooden biplanes assumed the accounts were embellished for ideological purposes. The 1980s and early 1990s brought change. Glasnost under Mikhail Gorbachev allowed more stories to emerge from previously classified archives. Western historians gained access to Soviet military records and began documenting the night witches with primary source verification. The 1990s and 2000s saw books and documentaries bringing the story to English-speaking audiences. Crucially, German testimonies collected from prisoners of war validated Soviet accounts completely, removing any doubt that these were factual operations rather than propaganda. Recognition accelerated through the 2000s and 2010s. The Russian Air Force Museum in Monino features extensive night witches exhibits including preserved PO-2 aircraft. Monuments and memorials appeared across Russia and former Soviet republics. Schools, streets, and public squares were named after regiment members. Films, books, graphic novels, even video games featured their story. Nadezhda Popova specifically was honored with biographical documentaries, interviews preserved in archives, and inclusion in multiple historical accounts as one of the most accomplished combat pilots of World War II, regardless of gender or nationality. The story of Nadezhda Popova and the Night Witches transcends its historical moment, offering lessons that remain relevant. About warfare itself, asymmetric tactics can defeat technological superiority when employed with understanding of enemy weaknesses and environmental constraints. Psychological impact sometimes exceeds physical damage in determining outcomes. Innovation and adaptation matter more than resource abundance. Underestimating any enemy based on preconceptions creates exploitable vulnerabilities. About underestimation more broadly, Germans' assumptions about gender and aircraft primitiveness blinded them to actual threat assessment. Prejudice creates operational blind spots that skilled opponents will exploit ruthlessly. Your enemy's apparent weakness may actually be their greatest strength if it forces you to fight on their terms rather than yours. About determination, flying 852 combat missions required resilience beyond normal human experience. Each mission could be the last, yet she climbed into that cockpit every night. The physical and psychological toll was immense and permanent, yet she never stopped until the war ended. Survival required not just skill and luck, but absolute refusal to quit regardless of fear or exhaustion. About physics and engineering, sometimes simple design beats complex systems when operational requirements favor reliability over sophistication. Understanding your operational environment thoroughly allows you to turn constraints into advantages. The right tool for the job isn't always the most advanced tool. It's the tool that actually accomplishes the mission. On February 12, 1943, when Oberst Heinrich Müller laughed at women flying crop dusters in that Morozovskaya briefing room, he represented assumptions that would cost Germany the Eastern Front. He calculated speed, firepower, technology, training. He never calculated determination. Nadezhda Popova proved across 852 missions and 23 tons of explosives that the Germans had calculated everything except the variables that actually mattered. Courage doesn't require the best equipment. Skill can overcome raw power, and physics itself becomes irrelevant when you understand it better than your enemy. Her missions weren't just numbers on Soviet records. They were proof that the most sophisticated air defense network in the world could be defeated by women in wooden biplanes who refused to accept that they couldn't fight. The Night Witches flew slower than German fighters could chase, survived in aircraft that shouldn't have worked, and terrified an enemy that never took them seriously until it was far too late. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the most powerful one. It's the one your enemy never sees coming until the bombs have already fallen and the ghost has disappeared back into the darkness.